Blog Talk Radio.
Is racism hurting you? On issues of race, are you unable to speak, think, and act with clarity and confidence? Are you tired of laughing when nothing is funny, smiling when you are not happy, agreeing when you really disagree? At counterracism.com, you can learn specific strategies and techniques to counter the behaviors of the people who practice racism in all areas of activity, using words correctly, following counter-racist logic, even counter-racist science projects designed to reveal what racism is, how it works, and how to counter it. The open-source code writing format allows you to pick and choose from a variety of counter-racist suggestions so you can produce the code that works for you. Stop by counterracism.com today and help replace racism with justice.
That's counter-racism.com.
Greetings. I want to thank everyone for tuning in. The C.O.W.S, Context of White Supremacy. This is Gus T. Renegade looking for another fantastic show, constructive information on racism, white supremacy, what it is, how it works, and things people can do to work against the system of racism. Today's broadcast, very fortunate. I had several people tell me about these articles that were written detailing how non-white people, black people in New Orleans during the whole Katrina fiasco were just being brutalized and some murdered. And several people were telling me you should really look at these articles. They're just, incredible. There's some videos that go with the articles as well. I was able to look at some of the investigative reports, and they were just, well, I want to say brilliant, but detailing some really heinous acts that went on in New Orleans. And I was able to contact the journalist who was responsible for these reports, and he was gracious enough to take out some of his time to speak with us here on the C.O.W.S. The reporter, Mr. A.C. Thompson, he works for ProPublica.org. These articles also were published in The Nation. They've popped up all over the web. There's some videos on YouTube. I have one posted. If you are checking this program out from Blog Talk Radio, you can see one of the YouTube videos that has actual footage from the investigation that he conducted. But Mr. A.C. Thompson, are you with us, sir?
I sure am. Thanks for having me on.
Thank you. Thank you. It is a real privilege to have you on the show here to go over your just incredible work. Is there any way you could just share with our listeners a little bit of information about yourself so they have a better idea of who Mr. A.C. Thompson is?
I'm an investigative reporter. I've been doing this for more than 10 years now. I spent a long time working at alternative weeklies in San Francisco, California, and primarily I would say that my work is focused on human rights stories, whether those are stories about people caught up in the criminal justice system or whether those are stories about the CIA's kidnapping program. So that's my interest in general.
Okay. I guess before we get into the specific investigation that you did into what went on during the whole Katrina debacle, are you a white person or not?
No, I'm white.
Okay. Important information.
Yeah.
This program, Context of White Supremacy, I have taken the position that we are in a global system of racism, white supremacy, and the definition that I use for white supremacy is a global system of people who classify themselves as white and are dedicated to abusing and or subjugating everyone in the known universe whom they classify as not white. Do you feel that is a correct definition for white supremacy and that such a system exists?
Yeah, I would say so.
Okay. Yeah, I'm really itching to get into the reports here. I want to make sure I have your permission to ask questions related to all areas of people activity around these events and the system of racism, economics, education, entertainment, labor, law, politics, religion, sex, and war.
You can ask on everything. I'll tell you straight up, I'm not an expert on probably most of those areas, but ask away, definitely. You know.
Groovy.
I mean that's covering a lot there.
For sure. I'm not an expert on much of anything, so I'm still learning, and I appreciate the opportunity to get more details about these reports here. I actually want to set the table for our listeners here. I was speaking with a admitted white supremacist some time ago, and he was actually in New Orleans, and we were talking about racism, and a non-white caller was on the line, and I was asking this white person, what would most white people do if it was announced at 12 midnight all the black people would be rounded up and killed? And the white person said it would probably be accurate to say most white people wouldn't do anything. They would, act as if they hadn't heard anything about this on the news, didn't know anything about it, quite regrettable, quite sad that it happened, but they really wouldn't do anything to try to stop it. And the non-white caller who was listening thought this was humorous. She said, that this should maybe be made into a movie. She just found it amusing. And I pointed out during the call that I did not find it amusing, that the image I had in my head is Katrina and thousands of black people being stranded and helpless and nobody doing anything. That's the image that I had in my head, and I didn't find anything funny about it at all. And it was one of those moments where it really clarified that non-white people really don't take this problem of racism, white supremacy seriously. And as a result, things like what happened or what you investigated, these types of things happen, and non-white people, black people, are frequently in a position of just being totally stunned, totally caught off guard, and in disbelief, and ask, how can this happen? How can this happen? So I really want to ground this program in, this is a system of white supremacy, and these types of things happen. I don't want to say on a regular basis, but they happen. This is not the first time I've heard of this sort of thing. Hopefully, as we get more details from Mr. Thompson, people can call in with questions and that type of thing. But I really want to ground this in, this is why I do this program, because these types of incidents should not happen. But unfortunately, this is the type of thing you should expect in a system of racism, white supremacy. In my view, I could be incorrect. Mr. Thompson, if you could share with our listeners what you were doing when the whole Hurricane Katrina thing first happened. What were you doing? What were your thoughts at that time in 2005?
At that time I was still living in California, and I was still working at newspapers, and really my thought at the time was, should I drop what I was doing at the newspaper and see if I could go do emergency work there at that time. That didn't come to pass, because what I started hearing pretty quickly was that it sounded like there were too many. There were more than enough emergency workers down there. And, looking back, I kind of regret it. I kind of regret just not being there on the ground at the time as either an aid worker or a journalist witnessing. On the other hand, one thing that my current editor has told me is, he said sometimes, after an event like that, it takes time to really understand what happened and really reconstruct the events. And sometimes the worst place to be to witness a serious atrocity is right at center stage as it's going on. And he used the example of the Balkans for that, and said, I was in the Balkans during the wars, and it was very, very hard to figure out what was going on as it was. And only with some time and distance did the true storylines become clear. And for me, I think that was true in doing this reporting.
How did you find out about these so-called white vigilantes and some of the activities that I guess were underreported during the Hurricane Katrina episode?
For me, this really started with Rebecca Solnit, who's an author and historian, and she was working on a book about disasters, and she took the concept of disasters pretty broadly. So she looked at Detroit as a city that had an economic disaster. She looked at the San Francisco earthquake. She looked at Hurricane Katrina. And she said when she was on the ground in New Orleans, after the storm had passed, after the flood waters had receded, that she was hearing these stories about this vigilante, this militia activity in a mostly white neighborhood called Algiers Point on the west bank of the Mississippi River. And she said, I really don't know how to grapple with this. I don't know how to investigate this. It's not what I normally do, but it is the kind of story that you would do. So why don't you come down here and see what you can figure out? And what I learned fairly quickly was that there were already pieces of the puzzle sitting out there. So you had Spike Lee's documentary, and one of the people who plays a starring role in my story, Donnell Harrington, he was in Spike's movie, and he describes this whole scene in When the Levees Broke about being chased down by a group of white men and shot for no apparent reason other than his race. As well, there was a Danish documentary crew that had gone to New Orleans right after the flood hit, right after the storm hit, and had videotaped white men in that same neighborhood describing shooting people and describing hunting black men, essentially. And I thought, wow, here are two possible pieces of the same story that have been sitting out there waiting to be connected, and we should see if they are in fact linked. If these guys in the video who are bragging about hunting down quote-unquote looters are part of the same group of people that nearly killed Donnell Harrington, and just how far did this sort of open season go?
I wanted to point out for our listeners, in case anyone wanted to do additional research, the documentary that the Danish filmmakers did is Welcome to New Orleans. Is that correct?
That is right, and it's a really good film, and I got to give them a shout out for helping us and letting us use excerpts from their material.
Okay. Welcome to New Orleans. You all heard it. Check it out. And actually, if you check out some of the video clips that are on the internet, you will see bits and pieces from that documentary. And it's hard to say good stuff with the material that they have, but I mean, it's incredible footage. And if you want to get more information and kind of attach some faces and see in living color with some of the things that we talk about during this program, you might want to check it out.
Yeah, definitely.
When did you actually get down into New Orleans and Algiers Point to begin your investigation?
I've been going to New Orleans fairly regularly now for 2 years, and so that's I first was there in the summer 2 years ago for this story, and that was the first time I went down there. And at first I wasn't sure that we had that much. I wasn't sure that I'd be able to piece it all together. And the more time I spent there, the more people I met, the more people I interviewed, the more I became convinced that what we were looking into was a pretty big story and a pretty significant story that had been massively overlooked by the media. And I'll tell you, it's one thing that surprised me a lot is, I have done a lot of stories involving the criminal justice system, involving serious crimes. I've done stories that helped get wrongfully convicted people exonerated. I've done stories that have implicated people in various crimes. And I was amazed at the number of people that I met who were willing to talk about crimes either as victims, witnesses, or assailants, and to talk totally freely about being involved in these shooting incidents, about their neighbor supposedly shooting somebody, about witnessing a shooting incident from the Algiers Point vigilantes, for example, and the fact that the police had never interviewed any of these people, that was surprising to me. It was surprising to me that, Donnell Harrington could go on national TV and talk about what sounded like a hate crime, and that afterwards nobody would bother to go follow up and say, hey, can you tell me more about what happened, or do you have any more ideas about who did this to you? That by the time I went there, that had just basically been forgotten.
Wow. I want to take this moment to point out words are very important. On this program at least, I don't use the term hate crime. Would it be correct to say that the incidents that you investigated and Mr. Donnell Harrington and some of the other folks that we're going to talk about, would it be correct to say that the evidence suggests that these individuals were victims of violent acts of racism, white supremacy?
I can't be inside the heads of the assailants and tell you why they did what they did. What I can tell you is from the evidence that I've gathered is all the victims that I have been able to identify were African American males. All the assailants I've been able to identify were white males. So that, and the things that people, and for sure, some of the things that I understand members of this white vigilante group to have said involve using racial epithets. Now, I can't really go beyond that, basically for libel reasons.
Oh, for sure.
In ascribing motivation. But what I can tell you is, in the reporting that I've done, it breaks down on those lines, just in purely the most factual ways, and that looks obviously to me that looks incredibly suspicious, and it would seem to point in that direction, but I can't, without having somebody confess to me and say, this is why I did this, or this is why this whole shooting spree occurred and I'm responsible and I did it, say why. What the motivations were. I can just say it looks very suspicious and to me.
Okay. So yeah, I don't want you to do anything that would get you in trouble or to attribute motivation to anyone. Just based on the evidence that you gathered that's out there, you suspect it could be. Would that be correct to say you suspect that it could be, these crimes could have been motivated by racism?
That would be correct. And I will tell you that, people I interviewed in the Algiers Point neighborhood, which is a quaint little neighborhood of well-maintained old houses it's not all white, but it is largely white, said things to me that made me think that they didn't have a lot of regard for outsiders, and made me think that they didn't understand very much about African American culture. So, when I interview a guy and he says, well, when we saw black men and they were wearing white T-shirts, we knew they were gang members, because in New Orleans, all gang members wear white T-shirts. And so we knew that we needed to, treat those guys with hostility. To me, that sounds like a very fearful and very poorly informed person. This is New Orleans in the summertime, and to think that every black man that comes around who's wearing a white T-shirt is like a member of the Bloods or Crips, to me is absurd.
Wow. I'm kind of curious as to some of the comments that these people made that made you feel that they did not have very much regard for black people. I know in the footage that I saw, and in the reports that I read of yours. And I'm all about just being honest about what was said. I have no qualms about the word nigger. If that's what was said, that's what was said. I think it's best to just go ahead and put it all out on the table. I saw and heard that word used a lot by people that looked like they were white in your video, talking, gloating, it almost seemed, about what happened. Could you, I guess, share some more of the things that the white people that you spoke with said that made you feel that they maybe didn't have too much regard for black people?
Yeah, I mean, here's the thing, is that interviewing two shooting victims, and that would be Donnell Harrington and his cousin Marcel Alexander, both of them definitely describe incidents in which people threw out the N-bomb repeatedly at them. Interviewing a witness, which I just recently did, who was somebody who was a witness to one of these incidents. She describes the same thing. That's one part of it that makes me say, oh well, that was one of the issues here. Another thing that makes me, that's a clue that to what perhaps was going on. Another thing that sort of speaks a little more broadly to New Orleans, or speaks to sort of how things break down in New Orleans and how things get discussed, is that when I interviewed the white folks in Algiers Point, and they were discussing these days after the storm, and they would say, I would hear things like this. I would hear things like, well, there was an evacuation center sent up in our neighborhood, and we didn't like it. We didn't like all these people coming over to our neighborhood, and we weren't prepared for that. One person told me, I'm not a racist, I'm a classist. I want to live around people who want the same things as me. Another person said, you could look at the folks who are coming to the neighborhood to be evacuated, and you could just look them in the eyes and see who the outlaws were. Another person said to me, when I heard Ray Nagin say, the other side of the city, on the other side of the river, is going to be underwater, and I'm urging people to go to the West Bank, go to the Algiers and Algiers Point areas. This person from the Algiers Point neighborhood said, oh, I thought we were doomed. I thought we would all be killed. I thought that was the end of us. And of course what's directly across the river from Algiers Point is the Ninth Ward. And that makes me really wonder if there, it gives you a sense of sort of how people in this neighborhood perceived folks from other neighborhoods in a city which is majority African American.
Wow.
And so the first instinct isn't like, the mayor says people should flee the floodwaters and they should come to higher ground on the other side of the river. What can we do for our neighbors from the other side of the city? How can we help them out? What can we offer them? The first instinct is we're all going to be killed. And to me that I don't think that's how I would respond. Let me say that. To me that seems very strange, but that was a repeated theme that came through in these interviews.
Wow. In your reports, you were talking about Algiers Point and the white residents specifically in Algiers Point, and you talked about the siege mentality, direct quote, that the white people had in Algiers Point, and specifically the stockpiling of weapons and assault rifles, shotguns, handguns, an Uzi. I guess could you share with our listeners more about exactly what this siege mentality entailed, and just the amount of weapons that these people had, and just as much detail as you could share about that?
Yeah, I mean, this is one thing that tripped me out, is that people in this neighborhood, white folks in this neighborhood, they cut down trees and they dragged downed trees and scrap lumber and other things out into the roads to block off the streets so people couldn't come through there. And then they began patrolling the streets in vehicles and on foot, armed with all kinds of weapons. And one of the main people involved in this, one of the organizers of this sort of militia activity told me, he said, look, what we did is we went around to the houses of people who had left and went in their houses and found their guns and amassed their guns. And we, whenever we could, we let them know that we were getting their guns, but we went and got them. And then, after a day, we had about 40 different weapons. And so they had this, this cache of 40 arms, shotguns, assault rifles, like you said, an Uzi. And as well as I understand it, there were people coming in from out of town, and in fact from other states, coming equipped with their own arms and their own trucks to join the effort. And that is something I've heard repeatedly from people who would know for the last 2 years, that this was not even purely contained to folks that lived in this neighborhood, but that there was a broader sort of paramilitary effort there with people coming in from outside to join this little army.
Whoa. Wow, that's surprising. I mean, I made an effort to read all of the different articles that you had on this story, and I didn't see that reported.
Yeah. I don't think it's in any of the stories, but it's something that to bring up now. It's coming up more in more reporting I've been doing lately.
Wow. I was actually going to ask, because I have heard people say, you brought up the paramilitary operations. I don't know if you're familiar with the Blackwater unit. I've heard different stories, not substantiated, but just different stories that Blackwater was in that area, and they too may have been harming black people, non-white people. Did in any of your investigating, did you find anything related to Blackwater?
I mean, I've heard a lot of things. I've heard things about Blackwater. I've heard things about about federal agencies. I've heard all kinds of stuff. But let me tell you this. I'll tell you this for sure, that there are several incidents that have been documented to a certain extent in which the NOPD was involved in shooting civilians that I don't think have ever been investigated properly. And I just discussed one of these with a former police officer, a former NOPD officer the other day, and there, I think if somebody took a look, they would find at least 3 to 4, at the very least 3 to 4 officer-involved shootings that have never been fully investigated from that time period. And my sense of the victims in all these shootings is that they were all African American. And so it's like these kind of things that lay out there and sit out there from this time period that don't get examined. And I'll tell you this, in my reporting, there were several people who died of gunshot wounds in that time period who really never got a serious autopsy. They never got a serious investigation of what happened to them. And I believe that there's more. I don't think, I reviewed more than 800 autopsies from the Katrina time period, and that was pursuant to a court order because myself and the Nation Institute's Investigative Fund, which helps support this reporting, sued to get access to those documents because the coroner didn't want us to review the autopsies, even though the state law for Louisiana says anyone who wants to read an autopsy, to copy an autopsy, is welcome to do so. And, going through those documents, we found 5 suspicious cases that had never been dealt with, really. I think there's more than that. I think that there's probably at least another 5, and I believe that a fair number of those involve shootings where the NOPD was involved. And I'm not saying that because I'm a weirdo conspiracy theorist or anything like that. I'm saying that because, for example, 2 NOPD SWAT officers, Jeff Wynn and Dwayne Sherman, discussed shooting someone to death in New Orleans Magazine and said, we saw someone we thought was a suspected robber, and so we decided to shoot this guy to death with a rifle, and did. So I asked around NOPD with former and current NOPD officers, and I said, is this a tall tale, or did this happen? And everyone said, oh yeah, that happened. Well, here's the problem. I don't see any autopsy in the documents that were turned over to me that matches the description of this shooting. I've never seen any documents to suggest there was any investigation into this by the NOPD, meaning was this appropriate action to take? Was this a justified shooting, or was this not? And you have it right out of the mouths of the cops that did it, that they shot this guy. So, that's the kind of thing that I'm talking about, that down there somehow manages to fall through the cracks. And, it may turn out that under close scrutiny that this was a reasonable thing to do. I don't know. But what I'm saying is that there are many of these incidents that have not been properly scrutinized by anybody.
Wow. Yeah, that I definitely want to address Frank Minyard. He's the autopsy person who's in charge of autopsies in New Orleans, and just the broader pattern that emerged here in reading your reports in terms of the conduct of the enforcement officials and the white individuals who reside in Algiers Point, even the individuals who reported this for local newspapers, journals, magazines, different news media outlets, in terms of a broader pattern of, number one, either not reporting, not investigating any of the incidents where these black people are being harmed, murdered in some cases, and then the fictitious reports, because I believe I did read that in one of your reports, that a lot of the stories that came out of the whole Katrina situation that, reported black people were doing this, black people were looting, babies were being raped. A lot of these stories ended up being false. Is that true from what you investigated?
Yeah, I mean, that's kind of the interesting way that it's broken down, right? Is that all these really lurid, really crazy stories about just horrible human behavior that we got right after the storm. A lot of those have turned out to just be totally bunk. From what we can tell, and I read a bunch of different interviews with medical personnel who worked at the Superdome. From what we can tell, the Superdome was not nearly as crazy as both Mayor Ray Nagin and then Police Chief Eddie Compass were saying. It's just a lot of this stuff that you heard at that time did not happen. However, stuff that you didn't hear about, for example, the death of Henry Glover, who I wrote about in his story, who was a guy who was a 30-something African-American male who was shot on September 2nd, 2005, a few days after the storm hit. What happened to him was nobody's entirely sure who shot him, but we know that he went to the police for assistance. The police, according to 2 different witnesses, didn't give him any medical assistance. In fact, they physically and verbally attacked the people Henry Glover was with, who had brought him to the police seeking medical attention. And the police then, and this is the NOPD, confiscated Henry Glover's dead body, and somebody set it on fire. And by the time I enter the picture, I'm looking at an autopsy report of a guy who has been so burned up that his remains were put in 5 different body bags. that there was almost nothing left of him but bone fragments and ashes and burnt flesh. And this happens. The police are clearly involved in one way or another, and yet there's no news report, there's no investigation, there's no nothing until I come around and start asking questions. And I'm a good reporter, but frankly, somebody with a badge and subpoena power should have been asking questions long before I came around. And those are the kind of stories, the Donnell Harrington story, the Algiers Point story, that I think have been overlooked, that really are horrendous crimes that have been almost entirely overlooked.
Wow. In reading your work, in what you just detailed with Mr. Glover, Mr. Donnell Harrington, and his cousins that were with him, Marcel Alexander and Chris Collins, there seemed to be a broad pattern that suggested that there was a lot of activity that could be racist, white supremacist acts of violence against black people. Would that be correct to say, based on what you investigated, that there was a broad pattern, could suggest there was a lot of racist, white supremacist activity directed against black people at this time?
I mean, I think there's a lot of incidents that probably haven't been properly characterized in many ways. I don't think that there's ever been a full analysis done of what occurred when Sheriff Harry Lee, who was the sheriff for the neighboring county, barred residents of New Orleans from coming over the Crescent City Connection Bridge, the bridge that crosses the Mississippi River, and barred them from fleeing a place that was underwater and coming to a place that was not underwater, and having his deputies fire shots at these people. To me, that's a serious official crime that you could that really hasn't been properly discussed and properly analyzed, and that people haven't looked at in the race and class context that I think it should probably be looked at in. And I don't think even people have dealt with the fact that the people who were coming over that bridge, for example, were going from New Orleans, on one side of the river, to a neighborhood that is New Orleans on the other side of the river, and a guy from the next county over got onto a road that is in New Orleans property, that's within the city limits of New Orleans, and barred people from moving around within their own state or within their own city after their mayor had instructed them to do what they were doing.
Wow.
To me, this is a crime, a human rights abuse of officialdom that has never been properly and thoroughly analyzed. And people talk about it, but I don't think that there's been really the kind of scrutiny that it deserves. More broadly, was there a broad pattern of racist activity during that time period? I think there was all kinds of activity that falls into all kinds of categories, but it's hard not to wonder when you see, for me, when I see the autopsies that look very mysterious to me, where people have a bullet in their head, where people are burned up, where people have died of blunt force trauma to the head, and they're all African-American victims, it's hard to wonder why these cases didn't get, one, what happened to these people. And in some cases, there are explanations that are non-sinister, and in other cases, there aren't. But it makes you wonder what happened to these people, one, and two, why has there been so little done to find out what happened to them?
Again, this is Mr. A.C. Thompson. Conducted an 18-month investigation into white vigilante activity in New Orleans during the Katrina episode in 2005, Gusty Renegade on the Cows. in one of your reports, you were speaking with a white person in New Orleans who wanted to remain anonymous, and she said that, I'll just quote her directly, my uncle was very excited that it was a free-for-all, white against black, that he could participate in. For him, the opportunity to hunt black people was a joy. I don't know. I mean, that's a pretty tough statement. Were these types of comments, was this the type of thing that you were hearing on a consistent basis from individuals that you talked to in terms of their feelings about what happened in Algiers Point with the white vigilante activity?
There's sort of two sort of spins that you get, and one, when people are able to speak anonymously and they're able to speak more truthfully perhaps and more candidly, that's what you would hear. When people were speaking on the record, people were less likely, white folks were less likely to say something as blatantly out there as that. And so when you're hearing those stories, those are sort of, when you're talking to people for attribution, then people are saying things more in the context of outsiders, people outside my neighborhood. We knew who the outlaws were. Some of these guys were just bad guys. That kind of thing. So there was sort of a different, the very blatant, boiled down to it, this is about race, this is about racism. Context came predominantly from people who, from either hearing from the statements witnesses made or victims made, or the statements that people like that person made, the anonymous source, because that person was anonymous and could say, totally honestly, this is what my family members were telling me. So does that answer your question? Sort of that I think that there were a lot of folks who wanted to go on the record were not going to go on the record in blatantly racist terms.
Well, I guess I would say in viewing the video clips, both from Welcome to New Orleans and from your own video that is available if you go to the Nation's website. You can see video footage from Mr. A.C. Thompson. He's narrating. It seemed like there were a lot of clips of white people saying the word nigger and just being very explicit in how they felt about black people, and specifically how they felt about the acts of violence and terrorism, really, against black people during this period of time. It did not seem veiled at all. They seemed very, they seemed proud. They seemed proud.
But, that material, the really inflammatory material, that was mostly from 2005, and that was from the Danish guys got that. And I think by the time I came there, people were more guarded, and they were more savvy, perhaps. And so that stuff that they got was really raw. It was really immediate. It was right after everything had just gone down. And even then, if you get into the outtakes and you look at some of the background video, it's not as candid as it's not, I don't even think that represents exactly what the mentality was. Or let me say that even the statements made by the vigilantes at that time, which are very inflammatory, are not as inflammatory as the things that I'm hearing from witnesses and from victims. And the things that I'm hearing from witnesses and victims are way more inflammatory.
Wow.
And are way more disturbing. And then, like I said, when I started interviewing and doing my interviews, the members of the vigilante group, the white neighbors who lived in Algiers Point, I think were more cautious about the things that they said. And that's not, they definitely told me some crazy things, but they were definitely more cautious.
What, if you could give us some examples, what were some of the things that the victims were saying that you felt were a lot more harsh than what is on the videotapes for the, or what's on the video footage for the documentaries that are online? What were some of the things the victims were saying that were said?
Well, I just saw Marcel Alexander, and he told me something that was pretty amazing, and he told me this story that I hadn't heard before. And he said that, so what happened in that situation is Marcel was walking with his cousin, Donnell, and with his friend, Chris Collins, 3 African-American men, and they're entering, and at the time, Donnell was a kid. He was 17 years old, and they entered this neighborhood looking to get out of town. They're looking to get to the evacuation zone. They want to be bussed out of town. They want to leave New Orleans. Their lives are wrecked. Donnell's house is trashed. Marcel's house is trashed. They need to leave. And they're walking through the neighborhood, and without any warning, somebody starts blasting them with a shotgun, right? And the shotgun pellets hit Donnell in the neck and the arm and the front of his torso and blow this huge hole in his internal jugular vein in his neck. There's a huge hole in his neck. There's blood everywhere. He gets up, and the gunman shoots him again. And when that happened, Marcel and Chris ran off. They thought Donnell was dead. They thought he was going to die. And they ran off. They thought that the only thing they could do was save themselves, right? So they run off, and they get taken prisoner by this group of vigilantes. And Marcel says that the way he and Chris survived is they told the truth. And they said, look, we're not looters. We're not here to rob your neighborhood. Yeah, Chris has a backpack and there's stuff in it, but look in the backpack. Chris is a diabetic, and he has his insulin pump in his backpack so that he won't die. And we're just trying to get out of your neighborhood. We're just trying to leave town. And he says the vigilantes had guns to their heads, were intending to kill them, and said, okay, if you're telling the truth, we'll let you live, and if not, we're going to kill you. And they open up the backpack, and of course there was the diabetic supplies that Chris and Marcel had said were there. And so Chris and Marcel are now alive. Marcel also tells me that the men threatened to tie he and Chris up and set them on fire. A bunch of other stuff like that. I mean, it's incredibly gruesome stuff. And it's like, I've been talking to him for more than a year, and it's like, I find him to be a very credible witness and victim, and I find his testimony to be very credible because, I've taken him photos repeatedly in video of people, and I said, hey, is this the person who was this person involved in shooting you, or a part of the group of people that hunted you down? And he, when he has been very clear about saying, I don't recognize this person, or that could be, or whatever, but he has never, he's never been, to me, he's been a very credible witness. A less credible witness might leap at the chance to identify someone, even if it was the wrong person, but Marcel has never done that, and his statements have been remarkably consistent over all this time,
Wow. I wanted to point out for the listeners as well, the incident with Donnell Harrington, Marcel Alexander, and Chris Collins. That story is in Spike Lee's documentary, When the Levees Broke, and I believe Donnell Harrington himself is in that documentary. So if you are looking for other sources where you can hear more about these incidents, that would be one, as well as Welcome to New Orleans. And you can, read Mr. A.C. Thompson's reports directly. They have a ton of information, and he has about, I think, 5 to 6. Is that correct, Mr. Thompson? Different reports that you've done on these incidents.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay. I'm very curious as to how. And I wanted to let the listeners know as well. We definitely will be taking calls if anyone would like to ask Mr. Thompson any questions. Number is 347-215-6071. Mr. Thompson, I wanted to ask, how did the white people, and just based on what I've heard, I'm going to reference these folks as suspected racists, just based on what I've heard. I can't prove it, but I suspect they could be racist. Do you think that would be a correct stance to take?
That's fine. Yeah.
Okay. How did these white vigilantes, suspected racists, how did they respond to you coming in to investigate what happened during this period of time?
People were generally, some folks, I really had to press them to go on the record with me, and it took a bunch of different attempts to get them to talk, and some people were very free about talking, and they were very open about talking, and they were very open to discuss incidents that were surprising to me. One person, this isn't in the story, one person described a shooting in which somebody was shot, an African-American male was shot to death in front of a grocery store, supposedly trying to break into this little corner grocery store, and just shot point blank dead in the early evening on one day. And the person who described this incident to me described it in great detail, and I put that part of it in the story. But what I didn't put in is the person I interviewed also named the shooter by name.
Wow. And
said, this is the shooter's full name. It was like, in a lot of ways, people were very, very open, and that surprised me. They were definitely not as open as when the Danish crew had been there. They were not. As crazy, but they still would talk, and they still would say things that I was surprised to hear, that surprised me.
Wow. Did you get a sense? Did you get a sense that they were regarding you as though you were doing something that you shouldn't be doing, or did you feel unsafe at any point? I'm very curious about that, because when I looked at your photo, I was not sure if you're a white person or not. And then I thought about it, and I said, oh, yeah, this has got to be a white person. There's no way a non-white person could do this story.
Yeah. Well, so here's the thing is that, for New Orleans, I don't really know how I read, because, I don't know what people were thinking. I told the truth, which is I would tell people, look, I'm interested in the untold stories of Hurricane Katrina. And most of the stories that have been out there are about things that happened on the other side of the river. They're about the Superdome and the mayor and this and that. And I'm interested in stories no one's heard. And I want to know what happened on this side of the river. And I would say, look, I've heard some of these tales, and I want you to tell me if they're true. And I want you to tell me what really went down. And people talked, At that time, I generally wasn't that worried. Nowadays, in New Orleans, things are a little different. The last time I went there, I got a message. I was there with a TV crew, and I got a message from one of the people I was traveling with, from somebody in the Algiers Point neighborhood, who said, do not come to this neighborhood. Your lives are in jeopardy if you come here. Nobody wants you around, and basically stay away, or bad things could happen to you, kind of message. That was, a couple weeks ago.
Wow. I'm very, and anyone who is in the chat room, I saw we do have a couple folks. Like I said, give us a jingle if you would like to ask any questions or make comments. I did catch, I'm not always paying attention to the chat room because I cannot multitask very well, but I did catch some of the people in the chat room. The term outsiders, they enjoy clear communication, as do I, and they would appreciate if, when you say outsiders, if you're talking about black people, if you could use the term just black people as opposed to outsiders.
And I'm using that term because that's the term that was used to me, and I actually think that generally that probably means black folks, but I'm not sure that it means all black folks. I mean, part of it is that there is sort of a quirk of New Orleans, which is that a lot of folks that people that live on that side of the river, on the west bank of the river, do see themselves as a neighborhood apart from the rest of the city, and part of that is race, to some extent, but it's also is geographic to a certain extent. I think because sometimes I would hear similar things from African American folks that live in the Algiers area, which is right next to Algiers Point, which is more African American neighborhood, and they would describe people on the other side of the river as well as being outsiders. But that's a term I was throwing out because that was the term being used. I'm just paraphrasing what I'm hearing.
Understood. I'm very curious because it's in several of your reports that individuals, suspected racists, white vigilantes, who practiced or who used violence, resorted to violence against these different black people, frequently justify their actions by saying, well, these people were looters, they were going to loot, they had already looted, the justifying their violent actions and saying that these folks were looting. And I was not in the continental United States at the time of the Hurricane Katrina episode, so I don't have all the images of the people who sat around and watched this unfold on CNN daily. But the little bit that I did get was looters. That was the constant theme, looters. The black people are looting. How much of an impact do you think the coverage in the news, on television, of the looting, how much of an impact do you think that had on the behavior of these suspected racist white vigilantes and resorting to these, heinous acts of violence against black people?
That was a huge factor, and a lot of it that I would hear would be, I heard from people who were on the ground in New Orleans residents at that time, that they were listening to local radio, and on local radio, all kinds of folks were calling in, and they were basically acting as citizen reporters. But the problem is that a lot of them were repeating crazy rumors that they had heard that were not grounded in reality. And so it became like, this total rumor mill augmented by modern mass communication technology. And so people across the city are hearing the radio. For a lot of people, the radio might be the only source of information that they have, because you can have a battery-powered radio, and a lot of people are out of power for their TV or anything else, right? And the power lines are down, and they're hearing all this insane stuff, and a lot of it is about looting, and a lot of it is about thievery and thuggery and atrocious behavior. And I think that people were terrified. People were scared, and that's important to remember. Definitely that fears were stoked very heavily, and like I said earlier, a lot of those fears were stoked also by public officials who, to my mind, were not very careful about the things that they were saying. And also, I mean, if you read the Senate report on Hurricane Katrina and you read the NOPD's after-action reports, it's clear that there were major communication problems within the government of New Orleans, and that at the highest levels, the government was spreading rumors, innuendo, crazy stories that were not true, and that was part of the problem. I mean, that's not just me saying that. The Senate said the same thing.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that is a thing that played into all of this, was hysteria and fear. And there also really were, not to excuse anybody's bad behavior, but there were very serious things that occurred, very serious crimes that occurred, during that time period that would put people on edge. And I think, like, when a government collapses, and effectively New Orleans government did collapse at that time because most communication methods broke down. And when that happens, effectively government ceases to exist. People are fearful when that happens. It doesn't justify what we saw in Algiers Point, but it's one of the factors that helps to understand, not the only, but one of the factors that helps to explain what happened and why it happened.
Very interesting. I was curious about because I read some of your follow-up reports, and December 25th of 2008, you reported that New Orleans Police Department, that they were beginning to look into some of the incidents that you reported in terms of these acts of violence in Algiers Point, suspected racist white vigilantes shooting black people. In your report, you said that the New Orleans police officials stated that they were unaware of this violence prior to your investigation. I'm just very curious, based on the evidence and material that you have gathered, do you think the New Orleans Police Department was not aware of what was happening in Algiers Point prior to your investigation?
It's hard to figure out what the NOPD is aware of and what they're not aware of. I mean, what I can tell you is that there definitely was at least one NOPD officer that lived in that neighborhood. I believe a couple lived in that neighborhood and stayed through the storm. And I would think that they would be aware of what was going on. Whether that message would get to their higher-ups or not, I don't know. Whether they were sympathetic with what was going on or not, I don't know. So many things happened in that time period, and there was such a horrible loss of life that I do think that a lot of people within the city government, within the NOPD, probably didn't know about these activities. With the Henry Glover, I mean, even with the Henry Glover incident, in which the NOPD was clearly very involved in some way. I've spoken to a lot of people who didn't know within the force, who didn't know anything about that. So it's hard to say. I mean, to me, what's a little baffling though is, like, look, Donnell was in when the levees broke. He discussed this happening to him on national TV. He thought something would happen then. Who was at the premiere for the movie? Like, everyone in New Orleans, everyone in New Orleans was there. All kinds of powerful people, law enforcement people, city government people. Like, why did everyone think that, like, yeah, we shouldn't track this guy down and figure out what happened? He was there. Donnell was there. Like, you could have gone and, like, started an investigation that day, and, like, I don't know. Why did that not happen? I don't know. But it's bothersome for sure.
I know in reports that I saw, the white vigilantes, suspected racists, Nathan Roper and Wayne Janik, they both indicated that the enforcement officials, New Orleans Police Department, had said something to the effect of, do what you have to do. It's chaotic, looting, do what you have to do. And saying that In so many words, the police authorized them to, handle their business. Did you get that feeling when you spoke with them? Did they indicate anything of this nature to you, that the police in some way, shape, or form told them, defend your territory, we, are having a lot of problems, we're swamped, the government has shut down, as you said, defend yourself as best you can?
That's what they've told me. That's what those gentlemen told me, and that's what they said. And one thing that's interesting to note from that time period is that a lot of people had their weapons confiscated by the NOPD during that time period. There was a massive lawsuit brought by the NRA over that, but those guys didn't. And those guys never complained about having their guns taken away. The white people of Algiers Point. And so that makes you wonder. Now, my point is, how high did that go? Did it go beyond like a few cops in that area? Lower level people? Did it go higher than that? I give sort of granting permission to that, to the militia to carry out its activities. I'm not sure. I'm not sure that, if you go over to the other side of the river and you talk to people in the main, people who did their tour for Katrina on the other side of the river, a lot of those officers really don't seem to know about this stuff. And I would bring it up and they would just be baffled. They would be surprised by it. On the west bank of the river, it's probably a good chance that officers, at least some officers over there, knew about what was going on and turned a blind eye to it. Another thing I heard from the white residents of Algiers Point was that the curfew that was in effect at that time just didn't apply to them, that they didn't have to worry about it. And that makes you think that there was a certain amount of permission granted by NOPD. But again, it's not. That's a thing that I've heard, and it's a thing that people have told to me, but it's still somewhat hard to totally pin down.
And you reported you have, I guess, continued to follow as the New Orleans Police Department and now the FBI are looking into this matter. On February 2nd, 2009, you wrote another article questioning the New Orleans Police Department and their investigation. And New Orleans police officials stated that there was a lack of information about these incidents. How do you feel about them saying that there's a lack of information, they didn't have anyone contacting them with leads? How do you feel about that, and does that make you feel that they're really interested in pursuing justice in this case?
My sense was like, look, all the names are here. Why don't you go knock on these people's doors? Why don't you go talk to these folks? I think that the sense from NOPD was, we want a victim to come forward and make a complaint and tell us what happened. And, for Marcel and Donnell, they had already tried, at least Donnell had already talked to the police and tried to make something happen, and he felt frustrated when nothing did. So he was kind of waiting. He felt like the story's out there, and, these guys, if they want to talk to me, they should come over here, but he wasn't in a rush to go knock on their door, and that was the thing. Now, should he have gone and taken his incident to the police for the second time? You can make that argument, and that would be understandable, but I think that was part of the thing, is NOPD was like, we need someone to call and and make a complaint. And Donnell was like, look, I already did that. If they want to do something, they know my name, they know the whole story, they should just come find me. They should come give me a call. Tell them they can, when he talked to me, he's like, tell them they're welcome to call me up, So I don't know what all that was about, at some level.
To your knowledge, the suspected racist white vigilantes Nathan Roper and Wayne Janik, have New Orleans Police Department, have they made any effort to contact them or any of the other white people?
At that point, I don't think so. Now, I don't know. Things are happening on the ground there with law enforcement from what I hear. And I hear vague different things, but I think there is some movement there. And I'm not entirely sure exactly who or exactly, who has been interviewed, whose doors have been knocked on. But I would not be surprised if there's been progress made from the last couple dispatches that I've done.
You also reported the Federal Bureau of Investigation. They're also looking into possible civil rights and violations, and in your story you were specifically focusing on the conduct or misconduct of New Orleans police officials. To your knowledge, at this point, has anything happened on the federal level in any of these incidents?
Like I can say, like I reported about the FBI. The FBI is definitely, and they've said publicly, we are investigating the incident with Henry Glover, and they're interviewing people, they're talking to people, they're trying to figure out what went down. And it's the criminal section of the Civil Rights Division of the Bureau that's looking into that. What you can infer from that is that the cases that they do, a large number of them are deprivation of civil rights by law enforcement agents. A smaller number are come under the federal hate crimes laws. That should give some clues about what they might be looking at with the Henry Glover case.
Again, I'm going to get ready to check the phone line here. I want to give out the number to any of the folks listening in. 347-215-6071. If you want to call in, Mr. A.C. Thompson, ProPublica.org. In terms of when I first read this report, and you were talking about how the white people, suspected racists, white vigilantes in Algiers Point, when they were collecting all these guns. Actually, I even want to go back to what you mentioned earlier. You said there was a confiscation of weapons in New Orleans during the whole Katrina fiasco. You said specifically that the white people in Algiers Point, their stockpile of ammunition was not part of this seizure. Whose weapons were confiscated when this went down?
I don't know for exactly who did. I can tell you that I know hundreds, if not thousands, of weapons wound up in a warehouse because they had been seized, and that there was a case filed at that time in 2005 against the government of New Orleans over this. And this was a huge issue for the NRA. I don't, breaking it down, I don't know whose guns were stolen and how it broke down on racial lines or anything like that. But I can tell you, it was not a complaint that I heard in that neighborhood at all. It was not something that people in Algiers Point complained about.
Wow.
So, the breakdown as for like what neighborhoods or anything like that, I don't know.
To go back with the collection of arms. The immediate thought that flashed in my head was when President Obama was elected in November, and the immediate skyrocket of arms sales, ammunition sales, record numbers, unless I've been mistaken. Do you remember this, what I'm talking about? Okay. And I was thinking, my gosh, could this type of thing happen again if there was a storm? Could this happen again, and could this happen in any area of this world, not just restricted to New Orleans, but if there was a storm in, I don't know, New York, if there was a storm in Virginia, if there was a storm in Orlando, could this sort of thing happen again where the looters, and the white people immediately feel fearful, and it's open season on black people? You said that people from outside of New Orleans were coming in and getting involved, according to reports that you heard. Do you think this sort of thing could happen again, and could happen in any area other than New Orleans?
I mean, I don't think I wouldn't confine it to New Orleans. I think you could see similar sort of dynamics emerge in a lot of cities. Now, I think New Orleans has deeper, more entrenched problems than a lot of cities. And by that, what I mean is that New Orleans clearly has a serious problem with racism, a deeply entrenched problem with racism. I've been in a lot of cities. I've been in many places in the South, and I honestly feel like for as beautiful as New Orleans is, for as great a city as it is, it also struggles mightily with racism, in more so than some other southern cities, probably. Definitely. Would it happen in New York? I don't think it would happen in the same way. But I think, I don't know. I don't know that it would happen in the same way in New York. I don't know that. I couldn't see it, but I could see similar dynamics developing in other places for sure.
You said you feel like New Orleans specifically has far worse forms of racism, white supremacy in that area. What do you think it is about New Orleans that makes the racism there that more insidious, that this sort of thing could happen?
Well, I mean, I think it's also partially that there are a whole host of incredibly deeply ingrained problems there. I mean, there's the fact that the government, Louisiana governments, have an incredible history of being ridiculously corrupt, from the parish level to the city level to the state level. That it's a cliche, it's a joke to talk about corruption in Louisiana, but it is an ongoing and huge problem there, and it's ridiculous. It is, New Orleans is, even in the best of times, plagued by a very serious crime problem, by deeply entrenched poverty, and these sort of problems that have never been effectively addressed. It almost shockingly unaddressed. It's definitely shockingly unaddressed. Right now in New Orleans, 30% of the city is abandoned or blighted, and that apparently is not, doesn't seem to be a problem for, no one outside of New Orleans has even noticed how devastated the city is. However, I will say that it's just look, I just came back from Richmond, Virginia, which is another southern city. I was also just in Mississippi, Louisiana, Alabama, Georgia, and Florida, and I just honestly, and maybe this is purely anecdotal, and maybe this is just my experience, but the sort of racist things that I hear in Louisiana, I feel like are in my experience, more persistent and more extreme than the things that I hear and witness in some other states, southern states. And I see big problems in those states as well. I mean, I see big problems in northern states and western states as well, too. But in Louisiana, I feel like every time I visit there,
that was a lot.
Somebody tells me something that just blows my mind, that I think is like, wow, I really cannot believe that I've just heard this.
No limit on resources.
Wow. 951. I'm sorry about that. 951. Do you have a question or comment?
Hello. Yes, I do. Can you hear me?
Yes, sir.
I was just uncertain if you were able to hear me on the air at the time, or see my call in the queue. Mr. Thompson.
Hey.
Could you speak up? We're losing you a little bit. Speak up, please, sir.
Mr. Thompson.
Hey.
I had a question regarding if you ever came in contact with non-white people that amassed guns or weapons.
Not from during that time period?
Yes, that's correct. During
associated with Katrina?
Yes, directly.
No.
Okay.
Not in my experience. But that's also not been what I've been researching.
Okay. I was just curious, as the individuals that you came in contact with in Algiers Point were white, correct?
Yeah.
Okay. Just a question. And my other question, Gus T. Renegade, you covered earlier when you spoke about outsiders potentially being code for black people.
Oh. Yeah, someone in the chat room type. It might have been you. I'm not sure.
Oh, I don't know. Suspected victim of racism, but.
Oh, okay. Did you have another question or comment?
You guys can keep going. I had some more, but
feel free.
I kind of got sidetracked. You can keep going, and if you don't mind, I'll kind of nudge in if that's okay.
That's A-okay, sir. We will. I'll ask a question, and then if you have one or three, feel free to hop in. There was a question in the chat room. Hello to everybody in the chat room. I generally cannot look at the chat room directly while I'm talking because I can't multitask. So I do see you. Thank you for hanging out with us, supporting the show. I make an effort to catch your questions when I can. Two that were in the chat room. Mr. Thompson, do you feel that the incidents that happened where the white vigilantes suspected racists, do you feel this was a class issue or a race issue? And I guess, at least for me, I would need you to explain what you mean when you say class. That's kind of difficult because you didn't use the term, but I don't like throwing that word out and not having a definition to it. So, if you could tell us if you think it was a class issue or a race issue, and what you mean when you use the term class.
That was one thing that was said to me by Vinnie Purvel, one of the white vigilantes, is he said, I'm not a racist, I'm a classist. I want to be around people I want to be around people who want the same thing that I want. And I'm assuming that he's talking about people that earn a similar amount of money as he does, people that belong to something that you would call the middle class, although that's a fairly vague and somewhat meaningless term. That's what he said, and that's what he told me. And I'm just gonna have to say that that's an explanation that he gave. What other people told me, other people used terms like outsiders. They use terms like outlaws. They use terms like
nigger.
Yeah, they use terms like people from across the river. And so there were lots of different ways to describe it. With me, people generally were not like super direct about what they were saying. There was, with me, as opposed to the earlier interviews and the actual incidents, people tended to be somewhat guarded, somewhat coded in the way that they describe things.
So did you, I guess from what I read in your reports and the video footage, I saw white people, suspected racists, saying directly, the anonymous person that you spoke with, hooray,
right.
This was an opportunity to attack black people with impunity. Did you hear anyone say, yay, this is an opportunity for us to get poor people? Did you hear anyone say anything like, oh?
No, that was not really part, that was not part of the conversation, aside from Vinnie Purvell throwing that out there, you know.
Okay. I think it's the same person in the chat room. He wanted to know, do you think, this is speculating, but based on your investigation, do you think the white people in Algiers Point could have been motivated to attack black people because of a fear of white genetic annihilation? And do you know what white genetic annihilation is?
No.
Okay. It is a theory. Dr. Frances Cress Welsing, she has a book called The ISIS Papers. Her theory is basically that the white phenotype is genetically recessive, and that white people who practice racism, white supremacy, are motivated to do so because if white people had sexual intercourse with non-white people, the offspring would be Barack Obama. He is a non-white male. That if this happened in high enough numbers, you would no longer have individuals classified as white. The skin complexion would be very dark, and you would end up with lots of non-white people. That, in a nutshell, is white genetic annihilation. Dr. Frances Cress Welsing does a much better job, much more thorough. She's a very educated PhD, third-generation physician. She can do a much better job of explaining her theory than I, but that's it in a nutshell. Do you think the white people in Algiers Point could have been motivated by white genetic annihilation to attack these black people?
You know, that I can't speculate beyond laying out what I've gone into here. You know, that's probably I can't really weigh in on that because it's not something that came up in my conversations. And you know, for me, I just need to stick pretty much to what people said fairly directly to me, and what inferences are pretty clear from that. So I don't know on that one.
Mr. Thompson, I have a question. Is that okay?
Yeah.
Gus?
Help yourself, sir.
All right. Thank you, sir. At the beginning of the show, you agreed that white supremacy exists, the system of white supremacy.
Right.
And as it is based upon the mistreatment of non-white people, would it be accurate to say that the individuals in Algiers Point, the white individuals in Algiers Point, were promoting racism, white supremacy? And this is just I'm asking this question because in your video, I mean, we have footage of white people talking about directly mistreating niggers, and you told us a story about a black male who was shot repeatedly with a shotgun. I mean, just a question.
You know, my situation is that what I have to be careful about the things that I say about people that I've interviewed, about people who appear in my stories, just because basically going very far beyond what I've reported and making real direct assessments about their motivations, about what they did, beyond what I can document, opens me up to be sued for libel. And that has not happened to me, but I don't want it to. What I can say is that clearly the effect of a group of white men shooting a succession of African American males, the result of that is clearly a white supremacist outcome, without a doubt.
Okay. And would
you say, does that make sense to you? Do you understand what I'm saying? Is that in these kind of times when you do these kind of stories about people, you can quickly get embroiled in a $3 million lawsuit for 5 years because of something you say about them on the radio. And so I just need to be careful about that because that's happened to people I know, Oh,
I understand, sir, the power of words. I understand. in your observation while you were there in New Orleans, would you say that the people who were more capable were white? Like the white people were very much more capable than the non-white people in securing themselves, making sure they could live on the day-to-day. I mean, I understand it was chaos, but would you say that the white people during that time were very much more capable?
You know, I mean, I think it's like that varies in a lot of different ways. I mean, you know, it's like in that neighborhood in Uptown that are comfortable white neighborhoods. Yeah, that you would see a definite disparity with, say, folks from the lower Ninth Ward, which was wiped out. You know.
And just for context, in the lower Ninth Ward, are most of the people living there non-white, black, or?
Yeah.
Yes, they are mostly black.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, almost entirely.
Okay. Okay. Appreciate that, sir. Anything else, Gus?
I was curious. Mr. Collins, Mr. Glover, Mr. Harrington, these are all black males. Do you think this story could have happened if Darnell Harrington and Mr. Glover, Mr. Collins, if all of these people are white? Do you think this story could have happened?
Not like this. Not like this. No, I mean, what I think is that if you had a string of a young man shot and they were all white, that there would be an entirely different deal. And if you flipped it around and you had the male residents of a predominantly black neighborhood barricading their neighborhood and shooting white men who walked through their neighborhood to get to an official rescue site, that what would happen would not be a sigh, amnesia, nobody paying any attention, but what would happen, and Donnell said this the last time we talked, what would happen would be the place would be stormed with extreme force by the local government, and that that it would be a bloodbath. That's what would happen, you know. And I think, you know, that's to me the way it would go down.
Why do you think that is?
You know, I think that you know, obviously there's a double standard for how how these kind of crimes get perceived in this country. And that's why that would be, you know.
Mr. Thompson?
Right.
Mr. Thompson?
Uh-huh.
Do you believe that in the system of racism, white supremacy, that white life is valued much more than non-white life? And that's why this would pan out totally different if it was white people getting shot by black people?
Systemically, yeah.
Okay. And there was a time, a couple months back, I'd been looking at different incidents of violence during Hurricane Katrina, and I'm not certain if it was you that disseminated this information, but I read somewhere that a white person actually had mercenaries or soldiers that were Israeli brought into New Orleans to defend where this individual lived. I'm not certain, again, if that was you, or have you heard of that story at all, or that information?
You know, that wasn't me, and I don't know about that.
Okay. Just a question. And another tidbit for the listeners, Blackwater USA has a newsletter that I had been subscribed to in the months before Katrina. And I remember when Katrina was happening, an email was sent out calling for police officers and military personnel that were on the Blackwater payroll, you could say, to be prepared to ship out. And apparently, and I could be incorrect, and I encourage everyone to search this information to see if it's correct, but Blackwater hires individuals that have duties in which they're required to carry a gun. So the normal pool of hiring people is ex-military or current police officers. And I remember an email going out calling for people to come and volunteer and be prepared to go to New Orleans. I tried looking for that email in my email accounts and I couldn't find it. If I do find it, I'll forward it to you, Gus. And if any of the listeners want to see that email, they can contact Gus.
If you find it, sir, I will. There's a comment section for every show. I will attach it to the comment section, so that way anytime someone comes to this show, the information will be right there. It'll either be a link, or if it's something I can copy and paste, I'll just copy and paste it, so it'll be right with the episode, so that anyone who checks this episode out in the future in the archives, bam, they'll have the information.
That'd be pretty white.
Try to be. Mr. Thompson, many of, or I'll say some of the folks who check out my program, they really get on me to make sure that I get suggestions in terms of what should be done. What do you think should be done, number one, about this incident, or incidents rather? What do you think should be done about these incidents, just in your view?
I mean, for me, this is the thing that you're talking about responses on multiple different levels. I mean, the very direct response is that there should be an adequate, genuine, thorough law enforcement investigation. I mean, that's one prong. I think another prong is shows like this and actually discussing what really went on and excavating the truth of what really went on and letting people know that the stories that they heard from Katrina in a lot of ways are very different than what happened, and shedding light on this incident and on the broader context.
Okay, so I want to make sure I'm accurately restating your suggestions, that it would be correct to have a genuine, thorough investigation of what took place and an effort made to disseminate information about what happened so that more people are aware of these incidents and more people can push others to investigate what happened so that these problems can be addressed in a correct manner. Would that be accurate?
Yeah, exactly. And let me be clear that it's, to me, at a certain level, there hasn't been the sort of truth commission that you need for Hurricane Katrina to really explain a lot of what went down. I mean, let me explain one last thing, and then I need to run, unfortunately. But, New Orleans buried 74 people with no names, unknown victims of Hurricane Katrina. And to me, that there's that basically, look, I'm not convinced that adequate effort was put into finding the families of these victims, finding out who they were, finding out how they died, any of that. And to me, it seems very strange, it seems very disturbing that that in this era, with DNA testing, with incredible forensic science that we have to hear about all the time on CSI, that you could have 74 people who simply basically disappear and are never identified. And there are a lot of things about Hurricane Katrina like that have never been fully explained and that have never been fully reconciled.
Wow. I guess if I could give one question in before you go. In light of the fact that your reports, you have revealed that there's seems to be a lot of evidence that would indicate a complicit involvement of New Orleans police officials in some way, shape, or form. Even person in charge of autopsies, Mr. Frank Minyard, and who knows, who would be responsible for this sort of investigation to do a thorough, sincere, and unbiased kind of investigation in this matter? Who would be responsible for that?
And I got to say, I've interviewed some really great New Orleans police officers who are really genuine, sincere, motivated, and competent. But I don't think that the NOPD is the optimum body to do an investigation like that. I think really to do that sort of investigation, you're talking about the federal government to do a very serious, thorough probe of this.
Wow. Okay. Ruby, I don't want to hold you up. You have other plans. I know it's Friday and you're on the East Coast, so it's got to be getting late there. I definitely appreciate you taking time to call in the C.O.W.S, sharing lots of information on what happened, this tragedy in New Orleans. Again, Mr. A.C. Thompson, ProPublica.org. All these reports are available online. I have one of them in the description for this episode. If you just look up, it should be titled Katrina's Hidden Race War. If you click on that, it'll take you to the story. You can read it, and there should be links within that article to all of the other essays that Mr. Thompson has done. But again, I want to thank you. If there's anything that's coming down the pike in the future related to this story or other work that you're doing, if you'd like to pass that on to our listeners, that would be great as well.
Hey, thank you very much for having me.
Thank you. Thank you. We will definitely keep an eye out for your future work, Mr. A.C. Thompson.
Okay.
Yeah, I very much enjoyed this. Very constructive information. As I said, I was not actually in the continental U.S. when Katrina went down, so I missed kind of all the live stuff that was going on every day, and just coming back and back of the bus, and Tracy Brown, 2 victims of white supremacy, black people. Both of them told me about this story, Mr. A.C. Thompson's work. Both of them said, you got to check this out. This is incredible stuff. He's detailing how white people just want to rampage, attacking black people. In Katrina, I went, checked it out, and was able to track him down, and he was willing to come on the show. So I'm real happy. A little bit of teamwork with the non-white folks. Tracy Brown, she's about to snatch her master's, back of the bus, continuing to do constructive work to replace white supremacy with justice. He actually helped out the C.O.W.S. He was able to construct a Facebook group for the C.O.W.S. If you look at the show page, if you click if you're listening to this program on Blog Talk Radio, if you click the host link, it says Victim of Racism. If you click that, you'll go to the show page. There's a link for Facebook. All you have to do is click that, and bang, you'll be on the Facebook group for the C.O.W.S. You can sign up, join the group. If you have any requests for guests that you think should come on the program or questions that you would like to ask a specific guest, you can put it there. I try to check it regularly. I don't take criticism. Stop that. I had to rescind that because it's been my experience that non-white people love to criticize and talk bad about non-white people, and I'm not encouraging that. No non-white people should be criticizing. Really, nobody, white or non-white, should be criticizing other non-white people. If you don't like what that person is doing, don't think it's correct, do something yourself. If you don't feel this particular program is constructive, invest your time and energy in something that you think will be productive in the system of racism, white supremacy. Go right ahead.
I am a non-white and a black person. It sucks being black in the system of racism.
For sure.
But I must say that this program has been very productive for me in my life in collecting useful information that I can better counter racism. This specific show, for me, is a clear example of how helpless non-white and black people are in the system of racism. You have white people telling black people in Katrina to get to an official, well, I forget the correct term, an official evacuation zone, is that correct?
I believe so, sir.
And you have other suspected racists starting to shoot black people on the way to where other white people tell them to go. It's just like, what's going on? I'd say for all non-white and black people that we should be prepared for justice to not be, we won't see justice come out of this specific situation of Hurricane Katrina. And the only way we will ever see justice in terms of Hurricane Katrina and all other gross acts of mistreatment across the planet would be to do what the C.O.W.S is, counter the system of racism, white supremacy towards reaching a system of justice. But
Has it been your experience that non-white people, black people, non-white people, that they feel that Hurricane Katrina is a really gross example, a gross and explicit example of how helpless non-white people are in the system of white supremacy?
No, it's pretty sad. The most I've seen non-white people or black people look at Hurricane Katrina as an example of our helplessness is when white people, such as Mr. Thompson, speak about, quote-unquote, the injustice that black people or non-white people face. As consistent with the system of racism, anytime I've observed a non-white person specifically pointing to the example of Hurricane Katrina and explaining it in the context of white supremacy, it hasn't been very productive because, unfortunately, black people, in the system of racism and white supremacy, Mr. Thompson agreed that it was correct that white life is valued more than non-white life. And that plays out in and of itself. So I haven't seen too much activity or action on the part of black or non-white people to suggest that Hurricane Katrina showed our helplessness. Even during Hurricane Katrina, I was in the continental United States. I was in Seattle, Washington, not too close to New Orleans, but I remember feeling that, no one's really paying attention. It was on the news all over the place, but in terms of what's happening to black people, that wasn't wasn't talked about too much. I spoke about it with some people, some black people and some non-black people who were non-white, and I was told that I was depressed and that I spoke about this too much. But,
wait a minute, they said that you were depressed and what now?
I spoke about the system of racism. I spoke about racism too much. I didn't.
Wow.
But it sucks being black.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow. If you could compare, I don't know where you were in the world when so-called 9/11 happened. Do you feel non-white people and or black people, do you feel that they spoke about what happened with 9/11 more than what happened with Katrina, or about the same?
Oh, so much more. There were times when you could hear a pin drop. I was also in Washington State. I'm a bit south at a boarding school. White people are awesome. A missionary boarding school where they got niggers like myself, and they pay for us to go there. But I remember they had a bunch of non-white people from different areas of the U.S. Some were from New York. There were some from down south, a few from Oakland. I myself am originally from Southern California. And there were times when you could hear a pin drop during times when they would gather us together and play and have just news playing for us in a chapel sort of setting. And so they'd have this big screen and they'd have news reports playing, and people were quiet, and it was much more focused on 9/11 than what happened in Katrina. Another thing I encourage the non-whites listening to the show to do is check out a book by a suspected racist called Akil Collins. He wrote a book called My Jihad, and it spoke about 9/11 and suspected racists planning it out and having it premeditated.
Can you give us the author again, please?
Akil Collins, I believe it's spelled Aukil. Collins, Collins.
Okay.
And
Wow. Yeah. Unfortunately, I have to agree. I've had similar experiences with black people and non-white people on the whole in terms of Katrina. Just kind of seemed like they were upset for a little while. It was something for a little while, and then moving on to the next thing. No big deal. I don't know. I thought that was going to be something. I thought that was going to be kind of a catalyst for getting non-white people, black people especially, to be much more focused and, really trying to get our act together and trying to pay attention to what's going on and realizing how messed up things are for black people in the system of racism, white supremacy. But it seems I was quite mistaken that didn't seem to happen. I don't even really hear it mentioned anymore. I was telling someone my thoughts about the curious case of Benjamin Buttons and how I feel that film illustrates black people really have no resonance, no thought of Katrina at all, because the people that I know watched that film didn't think there was any level of racism in it at all. This film is set in New Orleans during the whole Katrina fiasco. People watch the film, they end up having a connection to Brad Pitt. No connection at all to the black people who were drowned, shot by these white people in Algiers Point. No thought at all. And I even brought this up when I was talking to black people, and they said, oh, yeah. And I'm like, this had just happened in our life. This didn't happen 20 years ago. This was just on the Oprah Winfrey show, I thought.
White people are awesome in terms of getting emotional attachment and putting it on the white people or white individuals, suspected races. Very good at that. Very good at that.
Phenomenal.
But, yes, sir. Yes, sir. It's pretty sad that non-white people across the board I've experienced don't really question. That book I mentioned called My Jihad, I read it before I understood the system of racism, white supremacy. But I do recall trying to get other non-white people to read it, and it was extremely very difficult. Extremely very difficult. I suspect that, more racists were pushing, or more suspected racists were promoting the story that we had a quote-unquote terrorist attack. But we don't really question. The Curious Case of Benjamin Buttons. I need to watch that film, sir.
Very interesting. I have not been able to finish up my Pulp Fiction film review because I've been working on different shows. I had a show this past Wednesday, had to do work for this show today. Mr. Tim Wise, as long as he's still down, that'll be Monday at 11:30. That's Pacific time, Monday morning. That'll be 2:30 Eastern. And then Bill Ayers will be on Wednesday at 2:30 Eastern, 11:30 a.m. Bill Ayers was in The Weathermen. He's now addressing racism, white supremacy. He just wrote a book about white supremacy. He was also involved in a lot of controversy during Mr. Obama or President Obama's campaign. People saying that he was friends with a terrorist and all this other stuff. So he'll be by on Wednesday. So I haven't been able to finish up my counter-racist film reviews, but I want to write about The Curious Case of Benjamin Buttons because I feel that's pretty saturated with racism, white supremacy, and illustrates how well white people are able to skillfully get non-white people to emotionally connect with white people, even fictitious white characters, and totally disconnect from authentic black people, victims of white supremacy, who are suffering. That's on multiple levels in The Curious Case of Benjamin Buttons. And, hopefully that'll be down the road, racism-notes.blogspot.com. Hopefully that'll be down the road. Also, make sure you check out nonwhitealliance.wordpress.com. Lots of constructive information. In fact, that is where I first caught wind of the work of Mr. A.C. Thompson. Video was there, some of the clippings of the antics that these suspected racists in Algiers Point were carrying out was at the Non-White Alliance, that blog. So make sure you check that out, nonwhitealliance.wordpress.com.
There was a lot of use of the word nigger by the suspected racists in that I strongly suspected individuals were practicing racism. So what are we going to do to counter the system of racism? What can we as non-white people do? Because that's the only way this is really going to stop. In Katrina, Rwanda, Sudan, anywhere there's non-white people, black people, we're pretty helpless in the system of racism. So how are we going to end the system of racism? How are we going to counter it, sir?
My 4 suggestions, they're on my blog. Number 4, become as precise and refined as possible about how you use words, especially if you are going to talk about racism, white supremacy. I certainly do not claim to be an expert at this myself. I'm still learning and still refining my tools in how I articulate the system of racism, white supremacy, but we need to become much more effective in how we use words, particularly if we're going to talk about racism, white supremacy. And this is something really everybody, white people and non-white people, can do this, because if white people became more accurate with their use of terms in talking about racism, white supremacy, that would have a constructive effect. And non-white people, many of them, would mimic the white people. So if you had white people using non-white, suspected racist, no longer using terms like ethnic, minority, other, that would have a constructive effect. It would trickle down, if you will, to the non-white people. Number 3, being suspicious of all white people. This is critical in a system of racism, white supremacy. As Mr. Thompson spoke about, frequently the white people were speaking in so-called coded terms about black people, using terms like outsider and things of that nature. So if you're in a system where white people who practice white supremacy, their primary method is deception, you really got to be on your toes with being suspicious that any white person could be a racist white supremacist. And really this is at the crux of, I don't want to say my problem, but my concerns with Mr. C.O.W.S, who admitted to being a racist white supremacist on a previous edition of the C.O.W.S. I am suspicious of Mr. C.O.W.S. He has admitted to being a white supremacist. I suspect he is not practicing so-called anti-racism. I suspect he is practicing white supremacy. But be that as it may, C.O.W.S, nobody else is above suspicion if you are white in a system of white supremacy, and that is a logical stance to take for victims of white supremacy. Number 2, no sexual intercourse with white people under the system of white supremacy. Just brings up a lot of problems. Most importantly, it has been my experience, non-white people really lose the ability to think in a business-like, logical, truthful manner about white people when they are engaged in sexual intercourse with a white person. It just becomes very much a personal thing. They certainly can't be suspicious of the white person that they're having sex with. I have just seen that it has a plethora of adverse consequences on the non-white person every time. I can't even think of an exception to the rule, ever. Everybody that I know of, it has not had constructive results. And the evidence shows non-white people have not been able to successfully replace white supremacy with justice and engage in sexual intercourse with white people. We should try something else. Number 1, no mistreating non-white people. Non-white people really need to get that in their head. I don't even say no being violent with non-white people. No mistreating non-white people. Non-white people are subjected to far more than their fair share of abuse and mistreatment anyway. We frequently, all of us worldwide, are struggling and suffering. Non-white people should really make every effort to not mistreat another non-white person for any reason, even if that means, hey, I just don't have contact with this person. That would be a step in the right direction, because there would be no mistreatment and there would be no opportunity for escalated conflict amongst non-white people. Those 4 things, if we could just do those, you don't have to listen to my program, you don't have to send me any money, you don't have to read 5,000 books or anything. Just commit to doing those 4 things. Even if you could just do 2, that would have an extraordinary effect on replacing the system of racism, white supremacy with justice. Do you have any suggestions for anyone who might be listening in terms of things they can do, suggestions on how to go about the business of replacing white supremacy with justice?
The 4 things that, Gus, you just mentioned, I definitely strongly suggest to all non-white people. I'd strongly suggest that they listen to the C.O.W.S radio show. There's a show specifically with Mr. Neely Fuller Jr. I'd encourage all non-white people to listen to. Also a show with Dr. Francis Cress Welsing, I'd encourage all victims of racism to listen to and to read their 2 books. If there's any books to read, I definitely encourage victims of racism to read those 2 books. Dr. Welsing has authored the ISIS Papers, and Mr. Neely Fuller Jr. has authored the Code book for short. There's links to get those books on your C.O.W.S radio page. Is that correct, sir?
If you check out the programs that both of those individuals, when they appeared on the C.O.W.S, yes, there are links to both of their books. The book should be pictured. All you have to do is click on the actual book, and it will take you to a site where you can purchase the book, or you can go to Mr. Edward Williams' counter-racism.com, and you can get a copy of Mr. Fuller's book there as well. Proceed, sir.
Yes, sir. And just again, those 4 pillars or 4 suggestions, I think if non-white people took those upon themselves, we would make leaps and bounds towards a system of justice. Speaking on words, Mr. A.C. Thompson used words very, very well. I was just listening to him.
He's a white man. I mean, hey, you shouldn't expect anything less, really.
That's at warfare.
I mean, really, I'm laughing, but I mean, this is serious. I mean, that's
Sure.
At the end of the day, words, and words. Mr. Tim Wise, very skilled in the use of words. Really, I think if you listen to all of the white people that have been on this program, Dr. Kenneth O'Reilly, Dr. Martin Kevorkian, Mr. Michael Bradley, even Pharaoh Winfrey, admitted white supremacist known as Pharaoh Winfrey. White people tend to be pretty skilled in how they put those nouns and verbs together. And that's, that's not trickery, that's not genetics, that's, something simple that, hey, I am a black person, I'm not the most informed person about anything, but, I have made improvements in the way that I speak. Any non-white person can do that, and really it's more just about paying attention to words, how you use words, and really paying attention to definitions. If I wanted to get more specific, Dr. J.R. Harvey, another white man, professor at Cambridge in England, said on the program Wednesday, definitions are very important. And you really want to watch when people begin to substitute metaphors for definitions. As he said, very dangerous. You can really play with people and move their emotions around, and you really haven't clearly expressed what it is you're talking about. And white people are extraordinary with this, being able to use words in a very clever manner, throwing terms out that never really get defined. Just if that's one thing that you really want to try and work on if you're talking to white people, make sure they're not tossing out any terms that don't get defined. If they're going to use the term racism, make sure you got a definition for that. If they're going to use the term class, make sure you got a definition for that. If they're going to call you a segregationist, make sure you get a definition for that.
Oh, excuse me, sir. I'm sorry.
Oh no, you're all good. I do the same thing. I end up snickering when someone says something in conversations. I do the same thing. But yeah, just make sure that you get a definition on these terms. And specifically, I got this from Mr. Edward Williams, Counter-Racism Network. I asked them, I am codified in this, what do you mean when you say segregationist? What do you mean when you say class? What do you mean when you say I am spreading hate? I had a non-white person accuse me of this. Oh, you're spreading hate. What do you mean, spreading hate? And further, what evidence do you have? I did that bang, bang, and got an immediate retraction. I stole that right from Mr. Fuller because he said someone did the same thing to him. Just, calm down and get them to explain it. I have seen frequently white people have a very difficult time explaining themselves. Even white people who have fussed at me, didn't like what I said, no problem. Tell me where I said something incorrect.
A white person recently called you a segregationist, if I remember correctly. Is that correct?
I know a non-white person called me a segregationist. I'm sure white people have as well. And that's a term I don't use. If you've listened to the show, I've never picked that term up. I don't use it. I just try and stick with racist, white supremacist. If there's a term I'm going to attach to myself, it would be victim of white supremacy. But these are all labels. You got to have a definition attached to them, and the definition has to make sense if we're going to use the term. So, That's why I would say it's important, because it has helped me. I think, years ago, if someone had done that, I would have maybe got upset, or I wouldn't have been codified. If I had to sum it up quickly, I would not have been codified in how to deal with that. Now, just knowing how to pay attention to words and to request definitions, it's no problem at all, because generally the terms that people toss at me, they have not defined what those terms mean, and when they do define what those terms mean, frequently they don't fit. And that's no problem either. We just, okay, what you said didn't really make sense, and we both agree, so we'll put that down, and we'll continue, and we'll stick to terms that we agree on. Go ahead, sir.
Oh, I was just saying it's productive.
Yes.
Productive.
Yes. Have you encountered anything similar in terms of just trying to be really precise with wording and getting people to explain what they mean when they use certain terms?
I have. I've been called radical. I've also been called hateful. Been told you can't fight fire with fire, and which actually I believe can be incorrect, because white people do that at times. There's a time for everything. But I've been called a lot of names, and I have found being direct and asking questions specifically about the name. What does this mean, or what does X mean? Please explain. Often people will not be able to explain. It's like, well, you can't explain it. I don't know what that means either.
And I laughed.
It's correct. Just a tidbit, sir. Have you noticed, or did you notice the non-white male from Korea who killed himself this past week?
I saw some of the details about it. I did not get to study it in detail. If you have anything pertinent to share, please do.
Yeah, I didn't study it in detail also. I'm sure white people are more informed about the situation. But I found it interesting that after he killed himself, North Korea proceeded to test nuclear missiles. And I thought maybe I don't know, but I thought those two events may be related. In that context, North and South Korea is just the product of a chess game, if you will, between white people from Russia and white people from the U.S. And Hillary Clinton said something to the effect that these actions need to be punished, and then a white person from Russia said, in quote, I encourage everyone to read there's a BBC article about it. Excuse me, sir. But a white person from Russia said, we, the white powers of the world, need to stand firm. Which
Wow. Wow. Is that in the BBC article?
That was in the BBC, yes, sir.
Wow.
Sir. Yeah, white people are making moves, as always. Or non-white people. Listen to the cows. Placed by supremacy with justice.
Wow. White people of the world wow. See, once you start paying attention, have you found that since you've become more informed about racism, white supremacy, have you found that you catch things like that more frequently, just in blatant places?
Definitely, especially with words. When you start paying attention to words and understand the power that they have, the words will jump out at you. And words they shape our thoughts, and our thoughts lead to our actions. And with that said, you start to pick up and be able to understand actions a bit more, quite a bit more, actually, in the system. So I'd say definitely paying attention to words, especially. That's one thing I'd encourage all non-white people to do, is definitely pay attention to words.
And reading, apparently. Reading can be very helpful. Yeah, you mentioned several books to check out, My Jihad, at the BBC. That's definitely not something that I think most victims of white supremacy do not make a routine habit out of checking BBC news articles. Or reading The Nation. Mr. Thompson, all of his work published right in The Nation, and several other news spots. I would definitely encourage really making an effort to get access to more information, books, newspapers, just as much information as you can get, because I too, as a gentleman noted, I too have seen a lot of examples of just blatant racist act. Even on CNN's website, they had information about, I think it was a 50% rise in white supremacist groups. This was their language. They said
on your blog.
Yes, racism-notes.blogspot.com. Yes, just blatant information like this on CNN. Like I said, this is not, some random non-white person just rambling off of this. This is CNN talking about this. So, become a little more informed about racism, white supremacy, you will see lots of evidence of white people talking pretty openly about what they think white people should be doing, how they feel about non-white people. White people of the world stand strong. I mean, it's pretty blunt in my opinion. I mean, you don't get more direct than that.
Another interesting tidbit I noticed was on Al Jazeera's new website, and they actually have a section of the site devoted, in their words, to conspiracy theories. It's actually a link. I believe it's in the top left. It says conspiracy theories. You can click that, and you can write what you believe is actually going on beneath the surface of the world. I suspect it's racism. And I've tried to post to that section of their website specifically, and they had a prompt that would bar you from posting specific words. And in the past, it would actually list the specific words you could not post. And I typed post about the system of racism, white supremacy, and specifically it barred me from posting white, racism, system, supremacy. I mean, everything that could accurately convey the system of racism, white supremacy through typed words, it would bar you from posting. And I tried to do this again recently, but it's interesting. They're pretty wide about it. They still bar you from posting those words, but they don't tell you which specific words you can't post anymore. So now it's a bit harder to define. What are their parameters for barring words now? It's a bit harder to define, but they changed that recently, which I thought was interesting.
Wow. Very
interesting. This is supposed to be the terrorist news network. I mean, come on now. Yeah.
Wow. That is fascinating. That's even that's pretty refined to get to where they just reject it and don't even let you know which words are not acceptable and will not be tolerated on their site. That's very.
That's what I'm afraid of, the system getting too refined where non-white people are like, and it's never too late for justice, but it seems like the system of racism is making leaps and bounds towards refinement. Just going and going and going.
I wholeheartedly agree. And again, this is at the crux of my concerns with Mr. Wise. Just, I'm suspicious. Farrell Winfrey, admitted white supremacist, was on the program. She said it would be constructive if all non-white people, victims of white supremacy, adjusted their thought, speech, and action to the belief that every white person is a racist white supremacist. She said it twice. It is the featured episode on my homepage for this show now. She said it twice. She said that would be constructive. Dr. Robert Jensen also said it would be constructive if non-white people were suspicious of all white people. The admitted white supremacist known as David Allen, professor at the University of Washington, it would be constructive if non-white people were suspicious of all white people. No exceptions. Tim Wise does not get a pass from me. I am suspicious. And he should understand that. There should be really no white person should take this personal. I hope Mr. Wise does call, and I hope to have a business-like conversation about my concerns, my suspicion of Mr. Wise. I have the same suspicion of Mr. Wise. Actually, that's not true. My suspicion of Mr. Wise is quite a bit higher because I noticed that most non-white people are not suspicious of Mr. Wise. So
Wise.
I'm sorry?
Non-white people love Mr. Wise. They clap for him. I saw Mr. Wise at a black church. I don't know what that means, but a church called Mount Zion Church here in Seattle. The congregation is predominantly non-white, black, and I witnessed Mr. Wise speak in front of these black individuals, many black people, lots of suspected racists. But the black people loved him. They clapped, they laughed. I mean, they loved the white man. That's what I can say. And I believe he is promoting and practicing racism, white supremacy, because he did come on the C.O.W.S radio show, admit to being a racist, white supremacist. He was in front of a large group of non-white people and spoke nothing about the system of white supremacy. He spoke about racism, he spoke about this, spoke about that, and he also I don't believe it's coincidental, but he also did attach emotion to a white person, his white daughter, just as he pointed out in the curious case of Benjamin Buttons. Mr. Wise attached emotional connection to a white person in front of non-white people, which I found was very interesting. Yeah. I'm looking forward to that show as well, sir.
I am very much looking forward to it. As I said, and again, this is not personal. I don't know Mr. Wise. I have no intention of going to Tennessee and egging his house, throwing toilet paper in his yard. I don't know him. And I mean, hey, I know a lot of white people that I'm suspicious of. So I mean, hey, you're not the only one, Mr. Wise. It's a whole bunch of white people that I could pile up on this program and tell them reasons why I'm suspicious of really any white person. So I mean, hey, it's no big deal. It's no big deal. It's not nothing personal. This is the business of counter-racism. And as I said, any white person who's honest, who is really about the business of replacing white supremacy with justice, they will understand. And more importantly, they will not take this personal, because it's not a personal attack. They will take the same approach that individuals who work with severely abused children take. You know these children are going to say some wild things. You know these children are probably going to call you some names. You know these children probably are not going to have the best conduct. When they do all these things, you don't take it personal. You already know these folks have been severely mistreated. I should not expect them to, be behaving in a correct manner, for them to be, the most well-adjusted people. I should expect them to have a lot of problems. I'm going to do my best to help them solve their problems. I'm not going to take it personal. I'm here to help them in any way that I can. That's the approach white people should take. It's not personal. Non-white person has any, suspicion, hostility. They're angry with white people. I understand. I know white people have done a lot of things. I'm going to try and do the best I can to help this non-white person solve problems. If they say anything to the effect that they're suspicious of me or don't like white people or whatever, hey, I understand. Hey, they got a lot of reasons why they should feel that way. I understand it's not personal. And move right along with the business of replacing white supremacy with justice. Anything that I say, anything that you say, any other non-white person in the system of white supremacy should not impede any white person from replacing white supremacy with justice, because that is the correct thing to do.
It's never impeded them from practicing racism. I mean, hey.
Exactly. But, again, hopefully Mr. Wise will jingle in on Monday, and we'll have a wonderful discussion, business-like, courteous discussion on Monday. And Bill Ayers, no real time to sit around and chat about that for too long, because Bill Ayers will be here on Wednesday at 2:30 p.m. Eastern, 11:30 a.m. Pacific. That'll be Wednesday for Bill Ayers. So, hopefully both of those will be constructive programs, get some good information. And, hopefully we will not have any personal outbursts. It'll be all business both times. Be just like The Godfather. Woohoo!
Definitely. Yes, sir. So,
I need to give credit where credit is due. Back of the bus, Tracy Brown, black people, specifically non-white people, victims of white supremacy, both of them were informed about Mr. A.C. Thompson, shared that information with me, said, hey, you should go check this out. This guy did really good work. You should be looking at this.
Did white work.
Hey, we did. Outstanding. And congratulations. Tracy Brown is graduating. She's getting a master's in architecture, so definitely want to congratulate her. Hard work, victim of white supremacy, working to do constructive things, and hopefully she'll check out this broadcast so she'll hear the fruit of her efforts in sharing constructive information, and she will hear her salute for good job getting that master's degree. Get out there and do constructive stuff for non-white folks and spread information. She read Mr. Fuller's book, so make sure you're spreading constructive information about racism, white supremacy, and what we should be doing to replace white supremacy with justice. Do you have any? Go ahead, sir.
Oh, no. I was just saying, definitely, I agree with all those. Congratulations to Tracy also. I know it's not easy being a black person in the system of racism to get a master's in architecture. That's something for all victims of racism to learn from and understand. If we want to do something, we can do it. So let's end racism, white supremacy, and replace it with justice.
Amen. In the shortest amount of time possible.
Amen. Yes, sir. Sir. Yes, sir. Yes.
For sure. Let's get this done post haste. I can think of nothing more that I would rather have than a system of justice to bump the system of white supremacy out, so I don't have to rankle Tim Wise any further. He can move on and do constructive things, and I can be doing constructive things, and we can all go watch some films that I won't have to do a counter-racist film review for. Want to thank everybody for tuning in. Another episode of the Cows. Again, we'll be back next week. Please favorite the program if you're listening at Blog Talk Radio. Favorite the program. All you have to do is click the little heart that's in the player on the Blog Talk Radio site. If you're listening elsewhere, that's not an option, but thank you for tuning in anyway. Please subscribe if you're listening from Blog Talk Radio. There's a link in blue on the Blog Talk Radio page. It says subscribe to the Cows. Click it, put your email address in, and you will get updates anytime a show is scheduled, who's going to be on, what we're going to be talking about, best way to stay informed. Again, thank you, everybody, for tuning in. I hope the information presented was constructive. Please check the blog, racism-notes.blogspot.com. Also, make sure you go Non-White Alliance. It's nonwhitealliance.wordpress.com. Do you have a last word you want to give out to any of the listeners?
Once again, I'd suggest that they maintain and continue to listen to the Cows. Check out the episodes with Mr. Fuller and Dr. Welsing. And four suggestions to non-whites: be precise and careful with your words. Suspect all white people are practicing racism, white supremacy. Do not engage in sex with white people. And do not mistreat other non-white people. I'd like to say thank you to you, Gus T. Renegade, for maintaining, keeping the Cows going, and constructive information for victims of racism to use, learn from, and counter the system of racism, white supremacy, to reach a system of justice.
Thank you for tuning into the broadcast. I appreciate the support, and hey, all of us doing as much as we can to get that constructive information out and to work to replace the system of racism, white supremacy with a system of justice. Hopefully it'll be done soon. I can retire, and we can be doing. We can all go play bass and listen to Curtis Mayfield and rock out.
What would that feel like? Wow, without racism, wow.
Man, I can only imagine. I can only imagine. But in the meantime, in between time, I will be prepping and hoping to speak with Mr. Tim Wise Monday, 2:30 p.m. Eastern Time, 11:30 a.m. Pacific. The admitted white supremacist known as Tim Wise, alleged anti-racist. Precision with words. I want him to tell me what is incorrect about what I just said. Monday. Context of White Supremacy, Gus T. Renegade. Thank everybody. Hit the blog, nonwhitealliance.wordpress.com. We will catch you next week, Monday, or I guess if you're listening to the archives, then, check the archives and catch the shows. We'll catch you. Cows.
Yes, sir.
Is racism hurting you? On issues of race, are you unable to speak, think, and act with clarity and confidence? Are you tired of laughing when nothing is funny, smiling when you are not happy, agreeing when you really disagree? At counterracism.com, you can learn specific strategies and techniques to counter the behaviors of the people who practice racism in all areas of activity. using words correctly, following counter-racist logic, even counter-racist science projects designed to reveal what racism is, how it works, and how to counter it. The open source code writing format allows you to pick and choose from a variety of counter-racist suggestions so you can produce the code that works for you. Stop by counterracism.com today and help replace racism with justice.
That's counter-racism.com.